When building an underseat subwoofer enclosure, you may find yourself making the front corners of the box rounded like this to match the rounded corners of the seat. Making the stack of these is easy enough as we showed in the last video, but how do we cut these perfectly accurately so that we have a nice smooth surface to attach the top of our box to? Now there are a couple of different ways to do this. I've shown using a table saw here on the channel before, but what I really love about our custom building community is how we can share different ways to approach a task. I recently learned another really cool way to go about doing this from my buddy Sage over at Sounds Good Stereo, so I wanted to show you guys as well. Let's dive in and take a look. Making a subwoofer enclosure like this requires a lot of different techniques, and when you look at something like this, it's easy to wonder how it was done and want to know the magic behind the scenes. So let's go back a few steps. Now this is where the magic starts to come into play because we need to add an angle cut to this stacked part. Now there's a couple of different ways to do this, and I've shown other ways to do this before on the channel, but this is a different way that you can do using a negative cutout of our shape. I made this piece on the router by template taping one of our templates in position on this board, and then I drilled a hole and I held this carefully and went around on the router to make this cutout that is our female shape. What this allows me to do is I'm going to temporarily stick it to the enclosure, and now we have a nice surface that is completely parallel to that angle that I want to cut. Because we have this surface that is parallel to that angle that I want to cut, all I need to do is put a router on top here and stick it out the thickness of this board. So this board is 3/4 inch thick. I'll stick the bit out 3/4 of an inch, and then I could just run the router back and forth and completely make that perfect plane angle. Before we could do this though, there is a problem. Part of the enclosure is currently sticking out above, so obviously the router would run into that. We need to rough cut this so that it sits below this top surface. So here I've added my lines, and you'll notice that I did one on top and one on bottom. That's so that I can carefully watch the jigsaw blade and make sure that I'm between these two lines as I make my rough cut. So now that this is rough cut, I want to take a quick second to thank our monthly channel sponsor, New Concepts. On this build, we're using 3 different amplifiers and a DSP, which required quite a bit of different wiring. New Concepts has a full line of power wire, power distribution blocks and terminals, signal wires, speaker wires, and more. One of my favorite items are the basic distribution blocks. These are just so simple and they can be used with fuses or ground links. Lots of different options there too. To learn more, check out the link down in the video description. So let's take a look at my router setup here. Here I have a plunge router, which means we can plunge down into the workpiece. And this is a battery operated router, and you can see that the router bit we are using is a little dado bit. It has a bearing on the top, which is going to ride against the outside of our piece here so that we don't cut into it, but it's also got those cutting flutes down below that it's going to cut our enclosure with. I've got the depth set up so that when I plunge all the way down right now, it's just going to barely kiss this table, which is the bottom of this surface here, which is exactly where we want the bottom of that cut to be. And once we get to the bottom there, you can see that this threaded rod touches off on the top of that fastener there so that we can't go any deeper. I want to be absolutely sure that my piece here isn't going to move while I'm making this cutting pass, so I've stuck some template tape between it and the enclosure, but I've also used a brad nail over here just to make sure that this is secure in place, and I'll be able to just pop that brad nail off once we're done. This is going to kick up a ton of dust, so I have a dust extraction tube right here. You could also use a shop vac. Let's get the router on here. We're not going to go full depth right away. We're going to go just a little bit into it. We'll probably make 3 different cutting passes overall. Let's make this cut. So here it is, guys, check it out. We've still got our piece applied here, but you can see how it perfectly matched the bottom side of this surface, which matches to the rest of the enclosure. And if we pop our jig off, here's what it looks like here. So we now have a nice perfectly angled surface that we can attach the top of our enclosure to. Now you will notice there's a couple of spots where I got a little bit of tear out. To help resolve this, what I should have done is went down probably like 95% of the way, and then for that last cutting pass, go that final 5%, and that's going to avoid these small little tear out areas. But it's no big deal because once I apply the top of the enclosure, I could just fill that up with some wood putty or some body filler or even some wood glue and wood dust mixed up together. So no issues there. We can easily finish off the top of this enclosure. I used that idea of doing the final 5% on this side, and I got a much better result with just a little bit of minor tear out. So there we have it, another really cool technique to add to your skill set for your next build. To see the rest of this subwoofer enclosure build and the next video where we will be adding all of the beauty panel work, definitely be sure to check out the channel. Next time you need wiring for a car audio build, check out show sponsor New Concepts. You can learn more about them at the link down in the video description. A special thanks to them, along with Anthony, Mike, Mo, Jerry, Marcos, William, and the rest of the Patreon membership team. A big thanks to all those guys for making these videos possible. As always, guys, thank you for tuning in and watching.